I am John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 36th President of the United States. I was born May 29, 1917. My parents were Joseph P. Kennedy and Rose Kennedy. I grew up in Brookline, Massachusetts, and later Bronxville, New York. I went to Harvard and graduated with a degree in International Affairs in 1940. In September of 1941, after not being accepted to the Army for ongoing back problems, I joined the U.S. Navy. In 1943, when my PT boat was rammed and sunk by a Japanese destroyer, I led the survivors to safety despite grave injuries. In 1946, I became a member of the Democratic House of Representatives for 6 years. In 1952, I became a member of the U.S. Senate. In 1953, I married Jackie on September 12, 1953. And our first daughter, Caroline Kennedy, was born November 27, 1957, and our son JFK Jr. was born November 25, 1960. In 1955, I wrote Profiles in Courage and won the Pulitzer Prize in History. In 1956, I almost gained Democratic nominee for Vice President, but instead, in 1960, I was the first ballot nominee for President. I won by a narrow margin and was the first Roman Catholic president. I was the youngest man elected to office and the youngest to die in office. During my presidency, I set out to get America up and running again. My economic programs launched the country on its longest sustained expansion since World War II. I took action in the cause of equal rights and called for a new civil rights legislation. And not long after my inauguration, I permitted a band of Cuban exiles armed and trained to invade their homeland. Their attempt to overthrow Fidel Castro was a failure. After the Soviet Union renewed its campaign against West Berlin, I responded by reinforcing the Berlin garrison and increasing the nation's military strength, including new efforts in outer space. Then Moscow relaxed its pressure in Central Europe. Instead, the Russians wanted to install nuclear missiles in Cuba. In October 1962, I imposed a quarantine on all offensive weapons bound for Cuba after the missiles were discovered. With people worrying about nuclear war, the Russians backed down and agreed to take the missiles away. America responded to the Cuban crisis by persuading Moscow of the utility of nuclear blackmail. I now contended that both sides had a vital interest in stopping the spread of nuclear weapons and slowing the arms race, a contention which led to the Test Ban Treaty of 1963. The United States Supreme Court had ruled in 1954 in Brown v. Board of Education that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. Many schools did not obey the Supreme Court's decision, and segregation had also been prohibited at public facilities but continued. I supported racial integration and civil rights. During the 1960 campaign, I telephoned Coretta Scott King, wife of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who had been put in jail. I was able to release King, which drew additional black support. That evening, I gave my famous civil rights speech on national television and radio, providing equal access to public schools and other facilities, and greater protection of voting rights. My proposals became part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The 1960s were an interesting time for America. The space race was on, and we were able to put a man on the moon on July 20th, 1969. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed segregation in schools, public places, and employment. Hurricane Camille hit the Gulf Coast in 1969, and to date is the strongest hurricane ever recorded at landfall. Motown Records Corporation was founded in 1960. Just some of the famous musicians of the time were Elvis, the Supremes, the Beatles, and the Rolling Stones. Some famous movies from the 1960s are Mary Poppins, The Sound of Music, and The Graduate. Some famous TV shows were The Ed Sullivan Show, The Dick Van Dyke Show, and The Flintstones. Fashion was influenced by pop culture. Sports of the 1960s, there were 6 Olympic Games, and motorsports were established in 1966. Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and my brother Robert F. Kennedy were just some of the well-known assassinations of the 1960s. Sadly, I was also assassinated. On November 24, 21st, 1963, my wife Jackie and I flew to Texas, where I was hoping to get their vote. But many people in Texas did not like me. Flyers were handed out that day saying that I was wanted for being Catholic. At 11:22 the next day, Governor Connolly, Mrs. Connolly, Jackie, and I drove to Dallas for a parade and luncheon. At 12:30, my car made its last turn onto Elm Street. The first shot missed the car, the second shot hit me in the throat, the third shot hit the governor, the fourth shot went through me and then hit the governor, and the fifth shot hit me in the head, and the last shot hit the governor. I was taken to Parkland Memorial Hospital, where doctors told my wife that I suffered massive head and throat wounds. At 1 o'clock, I was pronounced dead. He was shot from up here, and this is where my car was. At 2:35, President Johnson was sworn in to be the 37th President of the United States in the back of Air Force One. After the shots, the Secret Service started searching for my killer. The gun was found in the school book depository along with a sniper's nest on the 6th floor. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested for my murder. 48 hours later, Oswald was also assassinated by Jack Ruby as he was being moved to the county jail. On November 25th, 1963, I was buried in Arlington National Cemetery, where an eternal flame still burns. My wife Jackie died of cancer in 1993. My son JFK Jr. died in a plane crash on July 16, 1999, with his wife Carolyn Bissett and her sister Lauren. My daughter Caroline Kennedy is my only surviving child. 2 airports have been named after me. A bridge, a school of government, Space Center, university, and U.S. Navy aircraft have also been named after me.